Hello there, welcome to my review of the Rockford Files Season 4, Episode 21 and 22, as this was originally a two-part episode, and it's the last of the season. The House on Willis Avenue, written by Stephen Cannell and directed by Hy Averback. The episode begins with a man walking through a construction site to his car and driving off, only to be spotted by site security. We then cut to Howard Hessman's Al Stever receiving a phone call from the man, Joe Tooley, saying he has evidence Stever won't believe, and they are to meet after Tooley has checked out one more address. Before Tooley can do so, he's surrounded by site security and a couple of armed goons in suits who nab him. They take him for a helicopter ride with a returning Jackie Cooper, this time playing Garth McGregor, who tries to explain that Tooley has got it all wrong, just as they take off.
Will I need a parachute?
We then cut to Jim sometime later talking to Rocky about going to a funeral. The funeral of Jim's PI mentor, Joe Tooley. This is a fantastic opening with just the right amount of mystery and reveal to get you really intrigued. We know Tooley was scared for his life after getting caught, having found some evidence that implicates McGregor of something, and we know now that he is dead, seemingly in an accident, but having seen what we've seen, that's kind of suspicious. Plus, we know that he was also a good friend of Jim's, which means that Jim will eventually be investigating whatever's going on. But there's also so much that we don't know about what's going on, that you can't help but be intensely curious about what it all means, as well as wanting to see Jim get justice for his old pal. We then see Jim at the funeral service where he meets fellow PI Billy Mayhew, played by Vince Howard. Not to be confused with PI Billy Merryhew, played by Cleavon Little in the episode Sticks and Stones May Break Your Bones, but Waterbury Will Bury You. This might seem a little confusing, but if for some reason a previous part in the show had to be recast, rather than recast it, they would create a new character with a slightly different name, while having them basically fulfill the same role. For example, FBI agent David Shaw, played by James McEachin, appears in This Case Is Closed, but FBI agent Dan Shaw, played by Wayne Tippett, appears in 3 further episodes. It's a weird quirk, probably just there to amuse the writers, but I think it's a fun way to handle recasting a role without recasting. They aren't there long before an argument breaks out between a returning Vern St. Cloud, played once again by Simon Oakland, and new PI Richie Brockelman, played by Dennis Dugan. Sorry for yet another tangent, we'll get back to your regularly scheduled review in just a moment, but this is technically a crossover episode, as the Brockelman character had been introduced in a pilot movie in 1976, and got a 5-episode series 2 months after this episode aired. Unfortunately, like other Rockford spin-offs / crossovers, the series, co-created by Cannell and Stephen Bochco, didn't take off, and never went beyond those 5 episodes. Their argument dies down, and the funeral concludes, with Richie asking Tooley's widow about any open cases he might have, putting him onto the case first. Jim is as suspicious over the death as Richie, and begins his own investigation by breaking into Tooley's office, setting off a silent alarm in a very high-tech, for the time, operations room.
We just got to kick off one of the dormant mics.
We get a beautifully orchestrated taste of how these 2 PIs, who will be our stars for this 2-parter, both operate. Jim following his hunch and taking the quickest possible route, even if it is the wrong side of the law, to discover what he wants to know, compared with young Brockelman asking permission to pursue his lead. Both of these are then contrasted against the irascible and devious Vern, who also breaks into Tooley's office, but not to investigate what might have happened to Tooley, but to steal his client list, drink his booze, and run up his phone bill.
Is that the way to talk to your brother? Look, I called you, didn't I?
And because of all this, he gets caught for his troubles. It's a lovely bit of character work that introduces or reintroduces characters through shorthand storytelling, that also furthers the plot, as Jim discovers an address on the Willis Avenue of the title. St. Cloud, however, is taken away in the same manner that Tooley was. And while we might not like him, our sympathies still lie with him, having seen what became of Tooley. But this loose end will have to wait as we catch up with Brockelman, using the similar sort of ruse we would expect Jim to use, but again in a slightly different way that sets him apart.
Well, Mrs. Tooley, she's out at the Spring Garden Hospital, and they're about to pitch her out onto the street.
Being far more apologetic for causing any trouble from the very beginning.
I know it's a lot of bother, but you know how it is with these companies.
Whereas Jim's MO is to act like he owns the place, Brockelman's is to act like he's the most put upon man in the world, and ends up getting the same result that Jim does. We then cut to a council meeting where Steva is giving the council members hell, one of whom is Tom Nardoni, who we saw on the phone with McGregor at the beginning of the episode, so we know that he's up to no good. In what could have been a confusing story with two semi-independent storylines on the go, is actually telegraphed pretty well, having already briefly introduced us to Steva and Nardoni, as well as being crystal clear about which side they're both on. It's here that Jim and Brockelman meet for the first time, with Jim recognising Richie from the funeral.
Didn't I see you at Joe Tooley's funeral?
Oh, yeah, Richie Brockelman?
The differences and similarities between these two is perfectly demonstrated in a short back and forth.
What are you doing here?
Oh, here?
Nobody sends that kind of
Nothing. How about you?
Nothing.
Which concludes with neither willing to be honest about their twin intentions. They eventually do open up to each other, however, and Richie is convinced that Tooley was murdered, while Jim is not so sure, but he's willing to be convinced. In usual fashion, Jim tries to talk himself out of pursuing what could be a dangerous case, while Vern gets easily scared off by McGregor.
I'll take him out someplace and cut him.
Cut him? What you mean cut him?
Cut you loose, Vern.
Richie and Jim, having not dropped the case, check out the house on Willis Avenue and find it boarded up and empty apart from an industrial air conditioner, which they both find very suspicious, and Jim begins to warm to his new sidekick.
Now, you just stay with me and don't say anything.
Having seen Jim partner with people he absolutely detests in the past, it's so refreshing to see him actually work with someone he enjoys being around, especially as Richie is a bit of a superfan, or at least pretends to be, who does exactly what Jim says. While looking at the owner of the house, Jim exclaims that everyone in the country is on at least 18 computers, whether they know it or not, and while that figure needs at least a few noughts added to it today, it also gives us a hint as to what the episode is going to be about. It and the air conditioner are clues worth noting if you're playing along at home. The pair visit Steva, who's very paranoid about who he can trust, and he's right to be, as his place is being bugged. Steva had been looking into Councillor Nardoni for years, but despite finding plenty of corruption, he never had any evidence, until Tooley found some, right before he died. He also mentions he'd previously hired a PI who wasn't able to find any evidence at all, one Garth McGregor. As Jim and Richie get back to Jim's trailer, a couple of Nardoni's goons take potshots at them, and a car chase ensues, first with them chasing the goons, then with the goons chasing them, with Richie showing his own neat driving skills in order to lose them. Recuperating at a motel, realising how deep they're in it, they both start to get cold feet, before eventually sort of talking each other around. And while this scene is pretty much pure filler, it's great character work, as they end up redoubling their efforts, tracking down the car that was shooting at them. They find out that the owner of the house on Willis Avenue and the owner of the car are the same person, with different names, and neither exists. Finding a second address with an air conditioner, they start to get a better idea of what might actually be going on.
Must be a relay station.
The plot of this episode ebbs and flows with the revelations that the pair discover, and while this means there's a risk of it starting to sag around this point, having come up against a few dead ends, it's maintained by a combination of new pieces of the puzzle being discovered, but also the chemistry between our two leads that really manages to elevate what could have been a serious dip in the pacing.
Listen, if I ask you another question, you gonna take my head off?
No.
They haven't really discovered much new information in this middle act, rather just being able to confirm what they were starting to suspect all along. But the dialogue they share is light and entertaining, with some very funny scenes that help to move from one clue to another. We also find out that the villains are now onto them and plan to take them down, which only adds to the suspense. And to add to the humour, they stumble upon Vern St. Cloud searching Richie's office. By now, his clownish behaviour is somewhat endearing, but he's not just there for laughs, as he's able to furnish them with just a little more information, recounting what happened to him and making Jim realise it has all the hallmarks of Garth McGregor.
Do you know who that reminds me of?
Who?
Pooling what Jim knows about McGregor's penchant for computers, previous trouble with what we now call data protection, and Richie's deduction of what might have really happened when McGregor investigated Nardoni, they are able to come up with the idea that McGregor is blackmailing Nardoni in order to run his elaborate digital information network. And while it would have been a hard conclusion to come up with or explain had this been a solo Jim episode, with a partner to bounce off, this solution feels very natural. I would be fascinated to know, however, how it played in the late 70s when computers were still a new, slow and memory deficient technology, because it feels incredibly prescient watching it today. Both men check in with their police counterparts just as arrest warrants go out on the wire for them, cooked up by McGregor, while McGregor entertains some foreign business partners he's been working with in other territories across the globe, all three concerned with how their operation might appear to the public and the government if it were ever made public.
When things get in the papers, I sleep badly.
Having spoken to Dennis and knowing how he operates, Jim gets the idea they're about to be sandbagged. So we get another great character moment between Jim and Richie as Jim dispenses some sage-like advice.
You know, it doesn't make any difference what anybody else thinks about what you do. It's what you think about what you're doing that's important.
And we find out that he is completely right about Dennis.
We got a county warrant here, Dennis. What are we supposed to do with it?
Why don't you sit on it?
We also get a brief glimpse of Richie's version of Dennis here, Sergeant Ted Coopersmith, coincidentally played by Robert Hogan, who appeared in the last Rockford episode as Lester Shaw. We get some more insight into how devious both McGregor and Nardoni are as they discuss their plans for Rockford and Brockelman, having set them up to be taken down with crooked police reports. As McGregor arrives at Rockford's, he discovers, for a second time in the show's history, that Jim's trailer is being put to use as a trailer, having been towed into the woods by Rocky, allowing Jim and Richie a safe haven, much to McGregor's frustration.
I want this guy found, BJ. You got that? I want him!
With his head cleared, Jim decides to set himself up to be caught by McGregor's goons, to squeeze some information directly from McGregor. And it works, as he's quickly picked up.
You guys ought to try swinging in on knotted ropes.
With Jim now on the offensive, backed up by Richie, we get some of my favourite scenes in the Rockford Files, where he refuses to take any crap from anyone, especially McGregor.
I want to find out what it is you think is going on here.
I'll bet.
And plays him like a fiddle. McGregor admits Tooley is dead, and is quite remorseless about the fact that he's the one who killed him.
So where's Tooley?
He's fertilizing a grove in Northern California.
Showing his true nature at this late stage in the episode. Jim remains unfazed throughout, and lays out everything he knows, or has worked out, about McGregor. That he's running a vast computerized database network that has been harvesting the data of basically everyone in the US. That he can sell on or use to his own advantage, allowing him to target any public or private figure for any reason he wants to, and it's all entirely legal because nobody knows he's doing it. Terrified by just how much Jim knows, McGregor orders his assassination and leaves. But thankfully Richie is on board the helicopter and they get the upper hand on McGregor's goons, using McGregor's helicopter to scope out his operations. They discover that McGregor's grand scheme is to house his vast database in an old missile silo, thanks to Nardoni turning a blind eye to any regulation. And so they call in the authorities, and things seem to be at a conclusion. We find out in the epilogue that Nardoni has resigned and McGregor has been arrested for Tooley's murder. However, it's left unclear if any charges will be brought from the information harvesting. We're given a final information card with a stark warning about how our data is being collected by private companies without our knowledge, and there's nothing we can do about it. And, well, I think it's pretty clear that those warnings were not heeded as they should have been. This is a sensational episode, and a sensational ending to a sensational season. The mystery, suspense, humour, characterizations, plot, and dialogue is just so perfectly balanced that I can't find fault. It makes an incredibly important political point that was not only not heeded, but that has only intensified in recent years, with the revelations about basically all internet sites, but particularly social media, harvesting our data and selling it on to whoever is willing to pay for it, with no regard as to what they might do with that data. This has led to data leaks and data breaches at so many companies that it's probably easier to find out who doesn't have a piece of your personal information by this point. I've said before that this show was ahead of its time, but this episode really demonstrates what I mean. It wasn't the law that the villains here feared, it was the public finding out and demanding something be done about it. And that should still be what modern villains harvesting our data should fear. But they've managed to make us complicit by giving us something for free while making us the product that they're selling to others. The performances are all excellent, with Cooper at his most villainous and Oakland at his most Weasley, while the chemistry between Dugan and Garner is thrilling to watch. This episode really does have everything I like about the Rockford Files, and I would give it 10 out of 5 if I weren't such a stickler for the rules. So for me, this is an obvious 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.